To my right is Mr. Graham Simon. Graham met the Unification Church in Oakland in 1981. Prior to that, he had been involved in spiritual groups in the UK for several years. Since joining, he has lived in the USA, Japan, and the UK. He holds an MA in economics from New York University. Graham has had extensive corporate experience, having worked for IBM, Shell, Con Edison, and Itochu in Japan. He now runs his own software business and is a trustee of the FFWPU UK. He was blessed in 1989, and his wife, he and his wife, Kimie, have 2 children. Graham.
Thank you. My primary concerns about the Constitution are not so much on the structural side, because I think they can possibly be worked out over time. And certainly, hopefully, that with the feedback that's coming from here and other parts of the world, then people look at the issues of accountability of the Supreme Council, which I think is pretty central. But I think that I see within the Constitution a desire to establish a theological orthodoxy, which will be very divisive. First of all, why do we have a constitution? Why is the constitution being created now? I was at the European leaders meeting in Venice last week, and there was discussion on this. But the primary reason that was discussed, and even mentioned publicly, but also kind of off-piste, so to speak, was the concern for what will happen to the unification movement when True Mother goes into the spirit world. And a concern from her possibly that if a structure is not set up properly, then maybe some of the true children may even want to take over the movement. So at least this is an attempt to clarify the situation and set up an institutional structure. But I think to understand how we've got to this point, it's necessary to look at history, because there have been a number of things that have led up to this situation over the last 30 or 40 years. And I would like to start with what inspired so many of the first generation, especially in the West, to join the movement in the first place. I can speak for myself, but I think I'm also speaking for a lot of my brothers and sisters who joined in the late 70s, early 80s. We were really inspired by the principle. And one of the core teachings of the principle was that Jesus was not God. Why was that important? It was important because it said to us, actually, when Jesus says, "Be thou perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect," he was commanding us. He was telling us that we had the possibility to be great. And that what the divine principle did was explained that Christianity had actually got it wrong. They had failed, that they had elevated Jesus to a position of divinity and put his standard out of the reach of the common man. The principle is beautiful. The understanding of the 3 stages of growth, taking us to a point at the top of the growth stage where we should be living in the direct dominion. Now, sadly, I don't know if there's anyone here who would claim to be living there, but I won't put my hand up. I think be brave man or woman who did. But that, at least, is the ideal. The 4-position foundation, the idea that we can create ideal families, that a true man and a true woman can come together. And even if we can't do it in the first generation, then the second generation can be better than us, and the third generation, the fourth, and by the time perhaps we get to the 7th generation, we have something very, very beautiful and people living very close to God. And of course, the idea was that the true family were going to serve as a model for others to emulate. And that was very core to our teaching and our belief in the 70s and 80s. So when did things start to change? I think this is my personal view, and you can research the Chom Song-gyong round about page 1700 or a little before there. But I think that in around 1991, 93, Father's expectations were running so high when he met Kim Il-sung that for Father, this was going to be the ultimate Cain-Abel reunion. And Father even says to Kim Il-sung, I'm going to bless 30,000 people. Kim Il-sung got very excited and said, that is such a great idea. Bring them to North Korea for their honeymoon. And you provide the tents and the food, and I'll provide this beautiful place where they can really enjoy themselves. And anyway, it didn't happen for various reasons, politically, South Korea, and maybe the States got involved. But it didn't happen. And in 1994, Kim Il-sung passed into the spirit world. And I think that was really a hammer blow for Father, because everything that he had said and taught was up to that point, we need the nation of God. And if you remember the Providence, we went to Jardim, maybe we should create it there, maybe it should be an island nation. And then, Father had to rethink. And basically, what this resulted in was the need for a new narrative. Now, I won't go into too much details, but that's when things started to change. And some fundamental parts of the principle changed. I don't think there's any doubt about it, that when we joined in the 70s and 80s, the key was restoration of the spirit world through returning resurrection. We understood that the spirit world was close to us, that people had gone into the spirit world in all sorts of conditions, but we could go possibly through similar circumstances or make conditions here on earth that could ease the pain of their hearts and somehow liberate them. And that's what we understood back in the 80s of ancestral liberation. But at a certain point, and I've never really understood why this wasn't discussed more, there was a sudden inflation of the number of people in the spirit world from 30 billion to 400. And we even sing in our songs today, still 30 billion. And if you look on the internet and see how many people have ever lived on Earth, probably by about now, it's about between 30 and 40 billion. So that's a big step up. Then we saw the emergence of the Cheon Providence, and I'm not going to go into too much detail. We all know how this works, but spiritual ancestor liberation at an earthly cost, And this is, I'm not knocking this is key to people's faith, and I think it's a matter of individual belief whether one believes in this. But I'm just saying this is the way in which I think our movement changed. And now we're told that, 100 days in the spirit world, people are blessed and they go to a workshop for 100 days and they become absolute perfect spirits. We can process, apparently millions and millions of people are being processed there through this method. But it does beg a question, actually. Why bother here on earth? Why bother at all? Let's just wait till we go for a spirit world, go through one of these courses for 100 days, and we're there. But that's a theological question.
You obviously got better lecturers up here.
Yeah, obviously. That's not a question I'm going to address at present. So that was the first major change in the principle. The second thing that changed was the view that true parents were a living example as a true couple at the head of a model true family. We saw them as our parents, but they were parents who we should be emulating. Then things started to change about 4 or 5 years ago. True mother's perfection was claimed by proclamation. We were told, okay, mother has now reached the same standard as father. That's fine. Then we were told that true parents had become the visible form of God from here to eternity. And then we were told that naturally there's kind of two faces of God. We have the invisible God of night. I think that's the original God that we believed in. And now we have the visible God of day. And I feel like we're moving inexorably to this idea of a deification of true parents. there are, people actually, I won't go into people's faith. It's up to each individual. And again, I'm not saying there is a right or a wrong. But what I am saying is that our faith has moved from something that was justifiable by experience to something that now becomes a sort of blind faith. There's a lot of things that we have to believe in that we can never actually prove. And fine, if that's one's faith, then fine. Personally, it's very difficult for me to accept that. So this has a number of implications. One of the things I find quite striking in the Constitution is Article 14, a very short and innocuous line, which names the three basic scriptures, one of which is not the divine principle. Now, I'm just raising a question. Is it that the divine principle has actually become an obstacle to the religion that we're trying to create here? Or is it just that people felt that the other three books that are there, that are listed, the Cheon, the Peace Messages, and one other, I think, that's still in translation called True Parents' Life, are the only scriptures that we need from now on? And if we look around further and objectively, what I see in the world now is a multiplicity of faiths. We have a Korean version of unificationism. It's like everything is going back to one's roots. And again, it may be very necessary if everything is going to be unified that we can go back to the roots. Where do the Buddhists fit in? Where do the Confucianists fit in? Where do the shamanists fit in? Who's to say? But all I am observing is that we have a Korean version of unificationism built on Confucianism, shamanism, Buddhism, and also, I think, influenced by this sort of mega-church Christianity that has happened in Korea in the last few years. We have a Japanese version, and in Japan, the emperor was divine until after the Second World War, and then he lost his credibility. But still, that is very deeply ingrained in the culture. We have Buddhism, we have Shintoism, and we have a reverence for ancestors. So obviously the Cheon Providence is very close to the hearts of our Japanese brothers and sisters. We have, I think, a Catholic version emerging. We're told that the movement is taking root very significantly in the Philippines and in Brazil. That's great. That makes perfect sense. Because to the Catholics, Jesus is God, and they have been long used to a spiritual hierarchy and an institutionalized spiritual hierarchy. But what about the Western Protestant version? Now that's a little more difficult. We've said, Father came on the Judeo-Christian foundation. That's what we believed when he first taught. And I think in the hearts of some of the first generation at least, I don't think this is universal, but I think there's a lot of desire to actually set the clocks back 40 years, try to recreate the movement as it was when we joined in the 70s and 80s. So this is what I see the Constitution aiming at. It's saying, help, we could fragment. What we need is to create some sort of theological orthodoxy. But the problem is, once you start to go down that route, then you start to exclude anyone who doesn't buy into it. Now, I don't know if you've been following Vision 2020, but there is actually only one strategic nation in Europe. Thomas Wang last week did say, I think we may have made a mistake. Having been here, I've been really moved by the spirit of the European brothers and sisters. We've only got one strategic nation, and that's Albania, and perhaps we should have a rethink. Whether they will or not, I don't know. But from the viewpoint of Korea, I think Europe is pretty much a lost cause. And it's because I believe that the view of the Constitution, the view of the religion that they're trying to build, doesn't mesh very well with the Protestant view. But this is a real problem for them, because fundamentally, Father came to save the whole world, not just the Far East or people who buy into a certain vision. And also, international marriage is absolutely central to Father's vision. And I think that that is one of the biggest weaknesses in Korea, that they don't really have such a big tradition of international marriage. It's the international couples. Father said again and again that we are the hope of the future because that's where restoration is taking place. Obviously, there's a lot of restoration between Japanese and Koreans that has to take place as well. But fundamentally, we cannot deny that. So if we lose the West, then I think it will be very, very serious for the development of the movement and True Father's vision. Now, I don't want to be prescriptive and say, what's right, what's wrong, what we should do. I'm just going to make 3 points and you can reflect on them. One is, we pray in our own name and we recite the family pledge as owners of Cheon Il-guk. And one thing I like very much about Reverend Ahn when he spoke in Venice was he was saying, you are the owners. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You have to work it out. So that, I feel, is very encouraging. Secondly, I just want to report an anecdote from the 80s. I remember when Japan was very, very successful, and Dr. Durst went to Japan to learn from the Japanese, and he came back and reported what he learned. And what he said was interesting. He said, yes, what the Japanese leaders told me is that when we meet Father, we go, yes, Father, yes, Father, yes, Father. And then we go back home and we do exactly what we want. And a third thing, I don't know, and I'm not going to give you the answer to this, but you can think about it. A man is presented with a handful of rice and he's told it's wrong to accept and it's wrong to reject. What does he do? So, having said all of this, I'm still very hopeful because I don't know what is the way forward, but I do know this is God's providence. And I just want to leave you with some thoughts from Gamaliel in the Acts 5, verse 39. So in the present case, I say to you, stay away from these men and let them alone. For if this plan or action is of man, it will be overthrown. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them, or else you may even be found fighting against God. So God bless everyone.
Thank you very much. I'm sure many of you have questions. Peter's first.
Like a point, it's interesting. I'm sure just a simple point of being responsible, personally responsible for Cheon Il-guk and those Japanese leaders who met Father. That's exactly what they were doing. I mean, it sounds like okay, they just went away and did whatever they liked. It's not like that. They actually had the ideal. They knew what Father really wanted, and then they just didn't take the stamp of do the A, B, C, D. They went back and they actually did it for the ideal. And it's a great example. We have to be personally responsible for what what God wants to create and what we feel with our intuition.
I think that's a very good point. Thank you for making that.
Any other questions? So Graham, do you think that were you saying that basically True Mother sees the Constitution as a kind of a glue, a last desperate act to stop fragmentation?
Those are your words, not mine.
I think they're very much
Couldn't
your
possibly
words.
comment.
Couldn't possibly comment.
I think that there is, obviously there's got to be a very genuine concern of what happens. Father was very concerned of what was going to happen when he went, and I think that what we saw happening in the last 15 years of his life was an attempt to address that concern. And I think that Mother has the same concern, and she is trying to address that in the best way that she can. I mean, my heart really goes out to Mother. I think she's been put in an extraordinarily difficult situation. Mm-hmm.
Can I comment on that? I just want to say, if you turn the clock back 10 years, you commented, Graham, that the big problem and headache for True Mother is the worry that the true children might take over the church. If you turn back the clock 10 years, the big worry for Father was that the true children might not be able to take over the church. I think that is the measure of how much we have lost the plot over this period, Graham. Yeah, I agree with you.
Mrs. Hartley.
Yeah, I think I can understand you saying about blind faith, but I think we have to have a balance. I think if we do have to have a measure of faith. I think not blind, I agree. We have to use our own internal barometer to decide what's right and wrong. But there are things, I think we'll all agree, that except if your name is Philip Hill, it's different. But most of us don't see the spirit world. We sometimes perceive of it intuitively or whatever. But there are things going on that we don't understand, and we have to, in a sense, have a measure of faith of something you don't understand. I think that's the kind of leap of faith that helps us grow spiritually. And Eddie and I were very amazed that we went to a spiritualist church to talk with people, and the spiritualist gave a message where my parents came through, and we just liberated them and blessed them. They'd been on the 100 days, and they both said, one after the other, and she described them absolutely, excuse me, she described them to a T, and said, she kept stopping and said, they're saying thank you so much for the work you're doing. And then the medium looked at me and she said, I don't know if you're doing healing or what you're doing, but whatever you're doing, thank you so much for that. And I felt it was an endorsement of what had just happened to them. They had been liberated and blessed and so on. So, I mean, that was out of the blue. We didn't expect that at all. And I think there are things that we don't fully understand. But I agree, just bulldozing forward with absolute blind faith is not the answer either. I think we have to have a balance between the two. So I took your point, but I think we have to balance. There's some things we will never fully understand unless we've grown completely to oneness with God.
No, absolutely. And I can say, in many questions of faith, I don't say I disbelieve. I just say I don't know. For me, the principle, I used to be able to validate it. Now I can't. Now I'm in a realm where I just don't know. I've been asked to believe, and some things I believe. We had a very miraculous year last year. I mean, I believe in the spirit world working every day. I feel the spirit world is very close. But in terms of details, there are things I just don't know.
Okay. Any other questions? Joanna.
There's two questions in my mind that are sort of at the back of my mind. And I'd just like to ask anyone who's got a reflection on either of these questions to make a comment from the audience or the podium. The first one is, Father didn't establish this constitution before he went to the spirit world. He obviously knew at some stage he was going to go to the spirit world. So that's my basic first reflection point. I always consider, well, perhaps if he was so worried about everything and, taking into consideration all the differences of opinion that there are and all the different ways of dealing with even teaching the principle, when I think back to what Father said about using certain teaching methods, he wanted to standardize everything so that we could uniformly present the original divine principle and not go off the beaten track and make our own splinter groups and different churches and different religious movements within the unification movement. So Father was very keen on standardization of what he wanted to see taught, but it was never spoken about to examine a way of, what do we need in the way of law? It wasn't spoken about. And I don't see any references to it when I study Father's words, so I'm just wondering if anyone else can shed any light on that. Ollie, okay, good. The second question is, the second question is just, if we believe in true parents and that True Mother is fulfilling the role of true parents, not just as True Mother, but as the representative on earth of True Father and True Mother, then it means that True Father is working with True Mother in this dispensation now? So that's the second half of the same question, really. Okay, now Father's in the spirit world, but obviously very busy doing lots of things, but also working with True Mother here. So if this is true parents working with us now, again, my question is, well, why didn't it happen before Father went to spirit world? But I can't ask that question to true parents because I'm not sitting there with Mother, but I would be interested to find out if there's a reason. So if anybody would like to discuss that or perhaps shed some light on that. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ollie.
The Constitution has been in the works for a while, from what I can understand. I was hearing rumours about Constitution 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm sure other people have as well. You receive, stuff filtered down and word of mouth and this kind of stuff. But from my understanding, it has been a topic of concern for a while. True Father did say a few times that there is a need for, he didn't use the words constitution, but law and things like that. He didn't exactly endorse the way that it's been written today, which is something that I'm very happy about because it kind of renews my faith in True Father. But he did put standardizations in place, and I feel the problem is that the Cheon Constitution in its current form directly violates those standardizations which he put in. So, for instance, we all know True Father, before he passed away, one of the gifts that he gave to us were the 7 textbooks. And it was said over and over and over again, these 7 textbooks are eternal. These 7 textbooks are here because I've given them to you and they're my legacy. And as was said before, 8, yes, including the family pledge, yes. And as was said before, only 3 of them remain, plus the family pledge. And I feel that the 2 issues which you raised are kind of conflicting issues in a way, and they have not. They should have been dealt with in the same breath and in the same process, but they definitely weren't, from what I can see.
Sorry, Peter was...
It just seems that in this forming of the Constitution, there's sort of a lack of honesty from about why it exists and why it's been formed. Like for a start off, Graham said possibly because now it's so important. Mother is trying to protect the legacy of the movement from. I mean, I don't know if Mother said that either, but anyway, it seems could be from factionalisms coming from the true family themselves, the different brothers. So it needs to be protected. Well, if that's the case, then we as older members who've put 30, 40, 50 years into should actually know about this, rather than just being put something on. So I think it's really valuable that these questions are coming out now. What do you think about that theory, that it's a protecting?
Well, that's what I'm going to talk about, funnily enough. But
Can I make a contribution? Go ahead. I see Father always working towards according to a dispensational timetable. And always certain conditions have to be laid before he can make proclamations, before he can take the next step, and so on. And actually, Father died before Foundation Day, did he not? And I believe that he couldn't declare the Constitution until Foundation Day was declared. He could prepare it, he could have it in the background, he could have it in his drawer, but he couldn't declare it. He couldn't show it to the world. So I think that's why it didn't come until now, or until recently. That's how I see it. Secondly, regarding Mother's connection to Father, I'm very conscious of the fact that we're constantly talking about Hunmanim channeling Daimonim. There's no reason in the world why Hunmanim couldn't channel Father. So for me, there's no question in the world that possibly Mother and Father are talking to each other quite regularly. I mean, it sounds like fantasy, but as an ex-spiritualist, it's not at all problematic for me at all. So I don't know what's going on in that respect, or whether Mother's feeling Father's words within herself, as is also quite possible, and there's a lot of people a lot less spiritually developed than mothers doing that all the time in the world. So, you know, there's a lot going on. It's very difficult to judge these things. If you read the latest book by Mrs. Yu, there's a lot of insights into things. She puts another slant on things, and you're going like, aha, okay, so that's why it was like that. And so I recommend looking at that too. So, what's it called? Reflections on the Kingdom of Heaven with reference to the divine principle, something like that. I've forgotten the name of it. Anyway, we're reading it for Hunda K. I just don't look at the cover of it all the time. Yeah. Anyway, it's a very interesting book. She has many, many insights to help us in that respect. Anyway, that's how I see these things.
Okay, thank you very much. I think maybe we can move on to our final speaker.
I'll just quickly say one thing in regards to what you asked again. The Constitution, when it was first drafted recently, it was promised that it would be sent out to members for consideration. Now, that was not fulfilled, but again, you've highlighted that you wish that that would have been done. And also, we did send a delegation there, or rather a delegation was called for, and their input was largely ignored. In fact, very blatantly, deliberately ignored. For instance, you know, a reference I made before to the you know, one of the great victories that we heralded as Western nations was we saw that there was no way, once you'd lost your rights to a Cheon citizen, to get them back. And we said we need to get some process in place. So they changed the title of a chapter, and that's it. You know, so, you know, like you said, it was thought about originally, but it was never actually carried out.
It seems that, especially I've been more enlightened through studying William Haynes' lectures, that when you look at the biblical history, our church has often made the mistake of emphasizing there's an able figure who dictates to a Cain figure, but actually William's lectures make it much more clear that it's more about synthesis. It's more about the qualities of both sides working together. But it does seem that in our movement, especially in the time of true parents, that's been suspended. And I think that, especially with something like this Constitution, I think a synthesis is needed, and rather than just a document being drafted that's dictated to the movement, more consultation is needed. And so, you know, events like this are really important. And so, anyway, time's moving on, and so let's move on to our final speaker.